August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The wreckage lay, scattered across the jungle floor like the discarded toys of giants. Twisted aluminum, shattered glass, and the acrid smell of burned aviation fuel mixed with the sweetness of rotting vegetation. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura of the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service picked his way through the debris field, his boots sinking into mud, still warm from the fire that had consumed the American B-17 Flying Fortress. The bomber had gone down 3 days earlier, caught by Zero fighters during a raid on Japanese shipping. Most of the crew had perished in the crash, but what Nakamura found in the ruins would haunt him far longer than the charred remains of the men who had flown her. There, in what had been the bombardier's station, partially melted but still recognizable, sat a device unlike anything he had seen before. It was a complex assembly of gears, gyroscopes, mirrors, and lenses, a machine of such intricate precision that it seemed almost alien. Nakamura, himself a pilot with years of experience, had dropped hundreds of bombs over China and the Pacific. He knew the crude methods his own forces employed. Visual estimation, simple mechanical sights, calculations done by hand in the seconds before release. Accuracy was a matter of luck as much as skill, but this machine suggested something else entirely. This machine suggested that the Americans had turned bombing into a science. He crouched beside it, tracing the mechanisms with his fingers, trying to understand. The heat had warped some components, but the fundamental architecture remained intact. Gears within gears, a telescope pointing downward, gyroscopes that would remain stable regardless of the aircraft's motion. And everywhere, the evidence of manufacturing precision that Japanese industry could not match, tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, materials chosen for properties Nakamura could only guess at. This was not just a bomb site. This was a declaration of industrial supremacy, a mechanical prophet of inevitable defeat. And in that moment, kneeling in the mud beside the wreckage of an enemy bomber, Nakamura understood something his commanders had not yet accepted. Japan was not fighting a war, it was fighting the future. To comprehend the significance of what Nakamura held in his hands, one must first understand the technological chasm that had opened between Japan and the United States by the second year of the Pacific War. When Japan struck Pearl Harbor in December 1941, it did so with supreme confidence in its martial superiority. Japanese naval aviation was the finest in the world. Its pilots were veterans of years of combat in China, their skills honed by experience no American aviator could match. The Zero fighter was faster, more maneuverable, and longer range than anything the United States could field. Japanese torpedoes were larger, more powerful, more reliable. In the early months of the war, these advantages translated into victory after victory. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies. But beneath the surface of these tactical triumphs lay a strategic reality that Japanese planners had chosen to ignore. The United States was not merely larger than Japan. It was an industrial colossus operating on a scale that defied comprehension. In 1941, America produced more steel in a single month than Japan produced in a year. Its automotive industry could retool for aircraft production with a speed and efficiency that seemed almost magical. Its research universities, its corporate laboratories, its culture of innovation, all of these were force multipliers that did not appear on order of battle charts but would prove decisive nonetheless. Nowhere was this disparity more evident than in the realm of precision bombing. The concept itself was quintessentially American. The belief that technology and engineering could solve problems that had previously required brute force. Why carpet bomb an entire city when you could strike a single factory? Why sacrifice thousands of aircraft and crews to attrition when you could achieve objectives with surgical precision? This was the promise of the Norden Bombsight, and it was a promise born from a uniquely American faith in the power of scientific progress. The device had been developed in the 1920s and 1930s by Carl Norden, a Dutch engineer who had immigrated to the United States and found in American industry the resources and freedom to pursue his vision. The Norden Mark XV bombsight, the version in operational use by 1942, was a masterpiece of analog computing. It could account for altitude, airspeed, wind direction, wind speed, temperature, and the ballistic properties of the bomb itself. It could track a target while the aircraft maneuvered. It could automatically adjust for drift and lead. And in the final seconds before release, it could actually control the aircraft itself, making micro-corrections that no human pilot could match. The specifications were astonishing. In ideal conditions, the Norden could place a bomb within 100 feet of its target from an altitude of 20,000 feet, a 4-mile vertical drop. This was accuracy that bordered on the unbelievable, and indeed, many in the military establishment had been skeptical until field tests proved otherwise. The device was so valuable that it was classified above top secret. Bombardiers took an oath to protect it with their lives. In the event of a crash or capture, they were instructed to destroy it by any means necessary. Each bombsight cost $8,000, more than the average American house, more than many of the bombs it would aim. Japan had nothing comparable. Japanese bombers used simple mechanical sights that required the bombardier to estimate target motion, calculate wind drift, and release by judgment and instinct. Accuracy was measured in hundreds of yards at best, and more often in miles. This was not due to lack of skill or courage. Japanese bombardiers were highly trained, dedicated professionals. But they were fighting with tools that belonged to an earlier era, while their enemies wielded instruments of the future. The discovery of the intact Norden bombsight in the wreckage of the B-17 on Guadalcanal sent shockwaves through Japanese naval intelligence. The device was carefully extracted from the debris, packed in protective materials, and shipped under armed guard to Tokyo. There, in a secure facility in the naval arsenal, a team of Japan's finest engineers and technicians began the painstaking process of reverse engineering. What they found was both enlightening and demoralizing. The Norden's mechanical complexity was impressive but understandable. Japanese engineers could comprehend the principles at work. But the precision of its manufacture was another matter entirely. The gears were cut with a uniformity that Japanese machine tools could not replicate. The bearings were ground to tolerances that exceeded Japanese industrial capabilities. The optical components were made from glass of a quality that Japanese factories could not produce in quantity. Even the materials themselves, specialized alloys, hardened steels, precision-machined aluminum, spoke of an industrial base operating at a level Japan could not match. One engineer, a man named Takeo Yoshida who had studied at MIT before the war, wrote in his report, "This device represents not merely a tactical advantage but a philosophical difference. The Americans believe that technology can perfect human action, that machines can be built to standards that eliminate error. We have never attempted manufacturing at this scale of precision. To replicate this device would require retooling our entire industrial base. And by the time we accomplished that, the Americans would have moved on to something else." The report was buried. The high command did not want to hear that the enemy possessed an insurmountable technological advantage. But the truth could not be buried so easily. Every American bombing raid that followed drove the lesson home with brutal clarity. Lieutenant Nakamura, the pilot who had first discovered the bombsight in the wreckage, requested and received permission to observe the reverse engineering efforts in Tokyo. He spent weeks in the laboratory, watching as technicians disassembled and analyzed the device. He asked questions, studied diagrams, and slowly came to understand what he had found in the jungle. And with understanding came a profound shift in his perception of the war. He had been raised in the tradition of Bushido, in a culture that valued spirit over material, that taught that willpower and dedication could overcome any obstacle. The early victories had seemed to confirm this belief. Japanese pilots, outnumbered and often outgunned, had triumphed through superior skill and fighting spirit. But the Norden bombsight suggested something that his entire worldview had not prepared him for. That spirit alone was not enough. That industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and scientific method could be more powerful than any amount of courage or dedication. The Americans did not need to be better pilots. They had built a machine that made precision bombing possible for average pilots, that democratized accuracy, that turned bombing from an art into a science. And this democratization, this technological leveling, was itself a kind of warfare that Japan had no answer for. Nakamura began to pay closer attention to the reports coming from the field. The pattern was unmistakable. American bombing raids, which in 1942 had been sporadic and often ineffective, were becoming more frequent and devastatingly accurate. Airfields were being cratered in precisely the places that made them unusable. Supply dumps were being destroyed with bombs that landed within yards of their targets. Ships in harbor, once considered safe from high-altitude bombing, were being sunk with a regularity that defied probability. The most striking evidence came from the raid on Rabaul in November 1943. American B-24 Liberators, flying at 18,000 feet through heavy anti-aircraft fire, had placed bombs directly onto the decks of two heavy cruisers anchored in Simpson Harbor. The ships, Atago and Maya, had been considered virtually immune to level bombing. Dive bombers or torpedoes, yes, but not bombs dropped from such altitude. Yet the Norden had made the impossible routine. Atago suffered 2 direct hits and had to withdraw for repairs that took her out of action for 4 months. Maya took 1 hit that detonated a magazine, killing 200 sailors and nearly sinking the ship. Japanese pilots who witnessed the raid were stunned. They had seen the bombs fall in what seemed like slow motion, watched them track unerringly toward their targets despite wind and weather. One pilot, Saburo Sakai, a legendary ace with decades of combat experience, wrote in his diary, "We are fighting men who have found a way to strike without needing to be brave. Their machines do what we do with our hearts, and machines do not tire, do not fear, do not falter. How do you defeat an enemy who has mechanized courage itself?" The Norden bombsight became, for Japanese airmen and naval officers who understood its implications, a symbol of everything they were up against. It represented not just American technological prowess, but the entire system that had produced it. The universities that trained the engineers, the corporations that manufactured the components, the military-industrial complex that could conceive of spending $8,000 on a single piece of equipment, the economic might that allowed such expenditure to be routine rather than exceptional. Every time a Japanese soldier saw the contrails of American bombers flying in perfect formation at altitudes his fighters struggled to reach, he was seeing the Norden at work. Every time a supply convoy was destroyed despite taking evasive action, despite weather, despite darkness, the Norden was there. It became a ghost in the machine of American air power, invisible but omnipresent, the hidden hand guiding destruction with mechanical inevitability. For the American bombardiers who used it, the Norden was known by a simpler name, the football. It sat in the nose of the aircraft, the bombardier hunched over it, face pressed to the eyepiece, hands on the controls that would link his vision to the aircraft's trajectory. In the final minute before bomb release, the Norden would take over, flying the plane with micro-adjustments to the autopilot, compensating for wind and drift, tracking the target with gyroscopic stability. The bombardier became a technician, an operator of precision machinery, his role transformed from warrior to engineer. This transformation was itself revealing. American military doctrine embraced it, saw no shame in reducing human agency to improve outcomes. Japanese doctrine could not conceive of such a thing. For the samurai tradition held that the human spirit was the ultimate weapon, that technology was merely a tool to amplify human will, never to replace it. The idea that a machine could perform a warrior's task better than the warrior himself was philosophically incomprehensible. Yet that was exactly what the Norden claimed to do, and the evidence, the reality, of course, was more complicated. High-altitude precision bombing worked well in clear weather against stationary targets, but over Japan, cloud cover was frequent. Jet streams at altitude could push bombers far off course, and the Norden's accuracy degraded significantly in non-ideal conditions. By early 1945, the Strategic Bombing Command would shift to low-altitude incendiary attacks, abandoning precision for area effect, and the resulting firestorms would kill hundreds of thousands of civilians. The Norden, for all its technological sophistication, could not solve the fundamental moral dilemma of strategic bombing, that destroying an enemy's capacity to wage war inevitably meant destroying the society that supported it. But in 1944, that reality was still months away. And for Japanese observers, the precision raids remained a source of profound psychological impact. They demonstrated that American bombers could fly over Japanese cities with impunity, that fighters and anti-aircraft guns could not stop them, that the defenses constructed at such cost were inadequate. Each successful raid reinforced the message. Japan could not win a war of technology and production. It could only fight and die, and hope that the cost to the enemy would eventually become unbearable. Lieutenant Nakamura, by 1944, had been transferred to Homeland Defense. He flew a late Model Zero, trying to intercept the silver B-29s that appeared like migratory birds over the Japanese sky. It was frustrating, almost futile work. The superfortresses flew at 30,000 feet, higher than most Japanese fighters could reach. When they could reach that altitude, the thin air made maneuvering difficult, and the bombers' defensive armament, remotely controlled turrets with overlapping fields of fire, made close approaches suicidal. Nakamura watched his squadron dwindle, one pilot at a time, until he was one of the few remaining who had flown in the early days of the war. During a raid on the Nakajima aircraft plant in Musashino, a suburb of Tokyo, Nakamura managed to position himself above a B-29 formation and dove through, guns blazing. He saw his bullets strike home, saw pieces fly from one bomber's wing, but the formation did not waver. The damaged aircraft fell out of line but continued flying, limping back toward the Marianas. And the bombs fell anyway, precisely where the bombardiers intended, cratering the factory floor and setting fire to assembly buildings. After the raid, Nakamura flew over the target area. The destruction was surgical. The factory was devastated, but the surrounding residential neighborhood was largely untouched. This was not the indiscriminate carnage of the Chinese cities he had bombed in 1938, where entire districts were leveled without regard for military value. This was precision. This was the Norden at work, and it was, in its own way, more terrifying than area bombing would have been, because it meant that the enemy could destroy exactly what they wanted to destroy when they wanted to destroy it, and there was nothing Japan could do to stop them. The cultural impact of American technological superiority, symbolized by devices like the Norden Bombsight, extended far beyond the immediate tactical implications. For a generation of Japanese servicemen and civilians, the encounter with American industrial might become a revelation that would reshape their understanding of the world. Japan had entered the war convinced of its cultural and spiritual superiority. The West was decadent, soft, weakened by materialism and individualism. Japanese society, with its emphasis on collective duty, sacrifice, and martial virtue, was believed to be inherently stronger. Early victories seemed to confirm this narrative. But as the war progressed, the evidence mounted that material abundance and technological sophistication were not signs of decadence, but of strength. The Americans were not fighting despite their wealth. They were fighting with it, using it as a weapon more effective than any amount of fighting spirit. The Norden Bombsight became, in prisoner interrogations and in the writings of Japanese intellectuals after the war, a shorthand for this realization. Captured pilots and bombardiers who had seen the device in operation spoke of it with a mixture of respect and resignation. It represented a mode of warfare that was fundamentally alien to Japanese military philosophy, warfare that valued efficiency over valor, precision over ferocity, scientific method over intuitive judgment. One captured bombardier, speaking to Japanese interrogators in 1944, tried to explain the American perspective. "We don't glorify suffering. We don't believe that difficulty makes victory more honorable. If we can build a machine that makes our job easier and more effective, we build that machine. The bombsight is expensive, yes, but it saves lives, our lives by making us more effective, and eventually civilian lives by letting us hit military targets accurately." That's how we see it. The interrogator, a naval intelligence officer named Jiro Tanaka, wrote in his report, "The prisoner's attitude reflects a fundamental difference in values. Americans view efficiency as a virtue in itself. They do not see technology as a crutch for weak spirit, but as the natural expression of human ingenuity. This is a more formidable opponent than we anticipated, not because they are more dedicated or more willing to die, but because they have created systems that do not require such dedication to be effective." By the time the war ended in August 1945, with the atomic incineration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, the psychological transformation Nakamura had experienced in 1942 had become universal. Japan had been defeated not merely militarily but philosophically. The entire ideological structure that had justified the war, the belief in spiritual superiority, the conviction that will could triumph over material disadvantage, the faith that divine protection would ensure victory, all of it had collapsed under the weight of evidence. The atomic bombs were, in a sense, the ultimate expression of what the Norden Bombsight had represented: American technological dominance applied with decisive force. They were precision weapons in the most literal sense, single bombs that could destroy entire cities, ending debates about strategic bombing doctrine by making them moot. But they were also symbols, just as the Norden had been. They said, "We can do things you cannot imagine. We operate on a plane of scientific and industrial achievement that you cannot reach. This is not a war of equals." Lieutenant Nakamura survived the war. He returned to his family's home in rural Yamaguchi Prefecture, burned his uniform, and never spoke of his service. In the years of occupation that followed, he watched as Japan transformed itself, abandoning the militarism that had led to catastrophe and embracing the economic and technological development that would, by the 1960s, make it one of the world's wealthiest nations. The transformation was not simple or painless, but it was real. In 1967, Nakamura attended an air show at the newly built Tokyo International Airport. American aircraft were on display, including a restored B-29. The aircraft was open for tour, and Nakamura, after some hesitation, climbed aboard. He made his way to the bombardier's station in the nose, and there, behind protective glass, sat a Norden Bombsight, not the one he had found in the jungle 25 years earlier, but identical to it. He stood there for a long time, studying the device that had once symbolized defeat, and felt not bitterness but a strange sense of gratitude. Because the Norden, and everything it represented, had taught Japan a lesson that no amount of military victory could have conveyed. That progress came not from clinging to tradition, but from embracing change. That strength was built on innovation and efficiency rather than on sacrifice and suffering. That the future belonged to those who could adapt rather than to those who could merely endure. The Norden Bombsight itself did not survive the war as a tactical weapon. By 1945, It was already being rendered obsolete by radar bombing systems that could work in any weather, by guided munitions that would make the entire concept of unguided bombs seem primitive. In the jet age that followed, precision bombing would be accomplished by computers and laser designators, and eventually by GPS-guided smart bombs that could strike within meters of their targets. The Norden would end up in museums, a relic of an era when analog mechanical computing represented the cutting edge of military technology. But its impact endured in ways that transcended its tactical utility. It represented a moment when technology became not merely a tool of war but a statement of ideology, when the precision of American manufacturing became a propaganda weapon as powerful as any bomb. For the Japanese airmen who encountered it, who tried to understand it, who eventually had to accept its implications, the Norden was a lesson in the power of industrial democracy. Not democracy as political system, but democracy as industrial philosophy. The belief that technology should be designed for the average user, that systems should be engineered to reduce human error, that excellence should be achieved through superior tools rather than through the suffering of those who wielded them. This was anathema to Japanese military culture, which glorified hardship and saw technology as something that should test the user rather than assist them. A sword was not meant to be easy to master. Its difficulty separated the worthy from the unworthy. But the Norden operated on opposite principles. It was designed to make precision bombing accessible to any bombardier of average skill, to democratize accuracy, to achieve through engineering what Japanese doctrine believed should be achieved through years of training and cultivation of spirit. In the post-war analysis, this difference would be identified as one of the key factors in Japan's defeat. The United States could train adequate pilots and bombardiers in months because its technology compensated for lack of experience. Japan, requiring years to train an elite pilot, could not replace its losses as they mounted. The American system was scalable, the Japanese system was not. And in a war of attrition, scalability was destiny. The story of the Norden Bombsight is not, ultimately, a story about a single device. It is a story about the collision of worldviews, about the moment when one civilization's fundamental assumptions about technology, warfare, and human capability met another's and were found inadequate. It is a story about how physical objects can carry ideological weight, how a mechanism of gears and gyroscopes can become a symbol of national character, how the precision of American manufacturing became, in the eyes of Japanese observers, proof of American supremacy. But it is also a story about transformation, about how defeat can lead to wisdom, how the recognition of superior methods can inspire adaptation, how a pilot who found an enemy bombsight in jungle wreckage could carry that discovery through years of war and loss and emerge, not with hatred but with understanding. Nakamura's journey from confident warrior to disillusioned survivor to citizen of a transformed nation mirrors Japan's own trajectory. And at each stage, the memory of that device in the bomber's nose served as a reminder of hard truths learned. The Americans who designed, manufactured, and deployed the Norden Bombsight believed they were creating a weapon that would make war more humane by making it more precise. The reality was more complex. Precision bombing gave way to area bombing, and cities burned regardless of technology. But the ideological victory was real and lasting. The Norden proved that American industry could produce instruments of astonishing sophistication in quantity and deploy them effectively. It proved that the American system, messy, capitalistic, democratic, could generate innovation that centralized, hierarchical, militaristic societies could not match. And for the Japanese airmen who faced it, who tried to understand it, who eventually had to accept what it meant, the Norden Bombsight became the symbol of a truth they had not wanted to acknowledge. That the war was lost not on the battlefield but in the factories, not through lack of courage but through lack of capacity, not because Japanese spirit was insufficient, but because American industry was overwhelming. August 7, 1942. Guadalcanal. A pilot found a device in the wreckage, and in that moment of discovery, the future of the war and the shape of the peace to follow became visible, written in gears and gyroscopes, in precision tolerances and mechanical certainty, in the unshakable logic of industrial might applied with scientific method. The Norden Bombsight did not